On today's Jerusalem Dateline, highlights from our war coverage in 2023, the brutal war that began after the surprise attack on October 7th as Israel launched into a war to defend itself. Israeli troops unveil the Hamas tunnel network beneath Gaza, plus the Hezbollah threat looming on Israel's northern border, and cowboys on the kibbutz standing with Israeli farmers to bring in the crops. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl. Today we're bringing you a look back at some highlights of our war coverage since October 7th. That was a moment we're still living through that has changed Israel forever. But first, a news update. Israel's war in the Gaza Strip is shifting into a new phase as troops change positions and Hamas and Islamic Jihad members admit to Israeli interrogators that they use civilians as human shields. Take a look. The Israel Defense Forces announced that they're releasing 5 brigades from combat in the Gaza Strip as the military is gaining more control on the ground. However, the IDF says the war against Hamas will likely continue throughout the rest of the year. And as the IDF lowers the intensity of the fighting in northern Gaza, Israelis in 6 communities between about 2.5 to 4 miles from the Gaza Strip will be allowed to return to their homes after being evacuated following the Hamas massacre on October 7th.
In accordance with the recommendations given by the IDF and the defense establishment, we will soon be able to return communities home in areas within a range of 4 to 7 kilometers north of the Gaza Strip to their homes.
And while Israel's military pursues Hamas, the country's High Court of Justice struck down the law passed by the Knesset to remove some of the Supreme Court's power. The measure would forbid justices to negate a law because they don't find it reasonable, but the High Court voted 8-7 against the law, which fueled months of anti-government protests before the war. But the battle over the High Court's power may not be over, although that fight may not continue until after the Hamas war is over. Meanwhile, the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier is returning home after an extended deployment. The Ford was sent to the Mediterranean to be within striking distance of Israel after the October 7th Hamas massacre. And Israeli fighter jets struck terrorist infrastructure in Lebanon on Monday and Tuesday, where Iranian-backed Hezbollah terrorists were operating. Back in Gaza, the Israeli military kept up its attacks on Hamas and revealed what it learned about how the terrorists hide among civilians.
During the operation in Khan Yunis, our forces identified suspects who were hiding among women and children. During interrogation, it was revealed that they were terrorists, some of whom participated in the terrorist attack on October 7th. Whether the terrorists are hiding in tunnels, hospitals, or by civilians, we will reach them.
The IDF also released footage of the interrogation of 2 Gazans who gave details of how Hamas used civilians against Israeli forces. An Islamic Jihad member told how Hamas stopped Gazans from evacuating and instead transferred them to the Shifa hospital. The terrorists stayed underground there until they realized the IDF was coming, and then they mingled among the civilians. A Hamas member told a story about a family who didn't want a Hamas operative to plant a bomb by his apartment because his children were inside. The terrorist told him he would put it between the father and his wife instead, and when the man kept arguing, the Hamas member shot him in the leg. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem. Just days after the war began, our bureau chief, Chris Mitchell, interviewed Ambassador Danny Danone about how he thought the IDF needed to respond and the information war Israel was about to face. What he saw was eerily accurate. Take a look.
What kind of response are you recommending to the Prime Minister?
I think we have to go against the Hamas, eradicate the leadership of Hamas, and I think it will be better for the people of Gaza. And I want to send a message for those people. We have nothing against you. We will do our best to minimize civilian casualties, but I would advise you to get far away from the Hamas headquarters and from the Hamas militants, because we are coming after them and we will hunt them down.
You're connected with world leaders after being in the UN for 5 years. What have you been hearing from different countries and nations around the world?
Well, as we speak, we have overwhelming support and we hear the condemnation from all around the world. But I told my colleagues that we want them to support us even when we will see the pictures of our troops hunting down the Hamas. It will not be easy. It will be challenging. But that's when we will actually see who are the real allies of Israel. Not now when they saw the kidnapped people being dragged into Gaza. You know, I don't know if you showed the horrific footage, Chris, but you see a woman, Holocaust survivor, 85 years old, being dragged by terrorists into Gaza. Families with toddlers being dragged to captivity of Hamas. So today we have the international support, but we will continue with the operation, even if the voice will change in the next few weeks. We should not accept a call for de-escalation. We should not accept a call for diplomatic negotiations. Now is not the time for any diplomatic negotiations. Now is the time for retaliation. Now is the time to fight against Hamas, to fight against evil. We are facing evil forces. I know many people around the world are praying for us, and we are grateful for that. And we also in the Bible, we know that you have to fight and stand against evil. That's exactly what we are doing here today.
Ambassador Danon, you're a member of the Likud party and part of the government, member of Knesset. There's been talk about a possible unity government. Do you see that as a possibility?
Well, I think today we don't have politics involved. We don't have left or right, coalition or opposition. We have to work together, stand together, fight together. We have to be one people today when we fight evil.
Right now, there are millions of people, evangelical Christians around the world, praying for Israel. How would you encourage these Christians to be praying?
First, I want to tell them that we will prevail. It's not going to be easy or short, but God is on our side, and I want to thank them for their prayers, and I want to encourage them to support us and to make sure that the support is not only in the next few days, but also in the weeks to come, when we will start to get the international pressure and the heat about stopping or having some kind of negotiations. You don't negotiate with the devil. You don't negotiate with evil. You fight evil, and that's exactly what we will do.
When the world finally saw the extent of what's been called the Metro Gaza, it confirmed what Israeli intelligence had known for decades. George Thomas reported from southern Israel.
Israel says the noose around Hamas in Gaza City is tightening.
Our activities are hitting at the heart of Hamas capabilities. We eliminated dozens of commanders. We blocked many tunnels, and we are hitting the enemy hard.
48 hours after breaching city walls, IDF soldiers like High Mailspin are now targeting the extensive network of terror tunnels deep beneath the surface, dubbed the Gaza Metro.
Metro is a nickname used by Israel of the underground Gaza. There's Gaza on top, and there's Gaza underground.
Mailspin, who has served almost 20 years in the Israeli army, was called up a month ago to take part in the military operations in the Gaza Strip. Today, he is right in the thick of it, focusing on hundreds of miles of those tunnels. Mailspin is part of the IDF's elite Special Operations Yahalom unit that's in charge of demolishing Hamas's tunnel networks.
Gaza Underground is, as you probably heard, 500 kilometers worth of tunnels. What you really have is various kinds. You've got the attack tunnels. Then you have tunnels that are for supplies and for weapons and for caches and for command centers. Then you have small tunnels that are about, let's just say, as wide as I can stretch my hands, and they, like, say this wide, and then you have in there just to run troops through.
The IDF releasing several videos showing its troops blowing up tunnel entrances and various shafts, some located near amusement parks like this one, while others, like this attack tunnel, discovered on the first floor of an apartment building.
The route passed through a residential neighborhood, through civilian houses, right through the living room of a house.
Each tunnel discovery, some located near mosques, hospitals, schools, and churches, coming chock full with weapons like mortars, guns, grenades, RPGs, mines, and more.
Now, all the systems aren't just a straight line. You have secret rooms, doors. You have so many things that you just got to be careful of.
This map showing a high concentration of tunnels in the north and south, with a few in the middle of the Gaza Strip. And now, as IDF forces push deeper into the city, Mail Spin, an Israeli-American Christian, is asking people around the world to continue praying for their military operations.
Pray that we'll have that supernatural wisdom. Where are these tunnels? Where is the threat going to come from? And they're tricky. They're tricky people, the Hamas. They're using trickery sometimes. It's not like fighting guerrilla warfare. They're like guerrilla warfare times 2.0.
George Thomas, CBN News, Southern Israel.
Up next, provocation from Hezbollah on Israel's northern border, on the edge of an all-out war. Northern Israel faces an increased aggression from Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed terror group. Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell took us to the northern border, where residents fear that after 17 years of relative peace, war could break out.
Behind me is a spectacular view of southern Lebanon. After the 2006 Second Lebanon War, Hezbollah has been rearming and now has as many as 200,000 rockets on the other side of the border. CBN News joined former IDF Colonel and National Security Advisor Kobi Marom on a tour along the border.
We saw an amazing rearming process from Iran through Damascus to the Hezbollah infrastructure. And we decided to not respond, decided to have a restraint policy. That's the reason why the major threat against the Israeli people today, 2023, 200,000 rockets and missiles across the border right here that can target today Tel Aviv and other Israelis. That's the major threat for Israel.
That arsenal serves as a deterrent to keep Israel from attacking Iran's nuclear facilities. And Maron believes the regime has given Hezbollah a green light to turn up the heat.
The Iranians have a high self-confidence, many diplomatic achievements lately across the Middle East. They understand that they can put a lot of pressure on the Israeli government and the IDF, if they will succeed with the Hezbollah, to create an attrition war along this border right here.
This wall serves as one of Israel's responses.
They're really concerned about the fact that Israel is going to build a wall, an obstacle along the 70 miles of the Lebanese border, because their wall plan is to occupy neighborhoods from the Israeli communities along the border and disrupt totally the Israeli war plans.
In the meantime, Hezbollah is pushing the envelope. Propaganda videos are rampant, ranging from this simulation of an attack on an IDF outpost to intimidating military exercises. And this footage shows Hezbollah special forces patrolling the border fence in violation of the UN resolution that ended the last war. Marom also fears what could potentially result from the combination of the terrorist bravado and this precarious situation.
Is it possible that we face a war between Israel and Hezbollah in the near future? Yes, it's possible, with a miscalculation of one of the sides.
For the last 2 years, Iran has been smuggling weapons into the West Bank, using a complex network of routes stretching across 4 countries. With Israel's ground invasion into Gaza in full swing, terror groups operating from the inside could open a new front in the war. George Thomas has more from Jerusalem.
Sima Shine, former intelligence officer with Israel's Mossad agency, tells CBN News this map produced by her institute shows the extensive network Iran is using to smuggle weapons to the West Bank and beyond.
Iran is the main proliferator in the region. They send UAVs and missiles to the Houthis in Yemen, to their militias in Iraq, to Lebanon, to Hezbollah, to Hamas in Gaza, and they have their presence in Syria. So what happens in the region, wherever you find any conflict, you find the fingerprint of Iran.
According to reports, Israeli intelligence noticed a spike in arms flowing to the West Bank between 2021 and 2023. It took action, reportedly stopping 35 shipments, seizing more than 800 weapons.
There's been quite a significant process of movement. There was a quite significant consignment intercepted by Israel close to a place called Ashdod Yaakov on the border in, I think, April. in which it was found that quite sophisticated IEDs were being brought into the West Bank.
Then in July, in one of its largest operations in decades, Israel deployed more than 2,000 troops to the Jenin refugee camp, arresting 24 terrorists and seizing more than 1,000 weapons and hundreds of explosive devices. 6 bomb-making facilities were also destroyed. The majority of the weapons confiscated, including drugs, said to have transited through Jordan, a key U.S. and Israel ally in the region.
Jordanians are enormously disturbed by that development, and rightly so.
Israel and Jordan share a 300-mile border that runs through the West Bank. Now, intelligence officials are concerned that Iran is attempting to use Jordan as a key transit point for weapons intended for use by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group, which has base of operation in the West Bank and is close allies with Hamas.
The Jordanian made it very clear, and particularly in the last months, that they will not stand for that, and they started attacking.
Now there's concern Israel could face a new front from terror groups operating inside the West Bank.
Yes, there clearly is that potential that these organizations exist. They're heavily armed, they have personnel, they have money, so they have will, so they have the capacity to launch attacks.
Since the October 7th attacks, Israeli security services launched multiple raids in Jenin, one of the West Bank's most volatile cities, arresting more than 1,400 terrorists. Last week, the IDF also targeted a terror cell believed to be close to launching an attack.
Thanks to the accurate intelligence and cooperation with the General Security Service, we identified and eliminated a terrorist cell that was a ticking time bomb. It was responsible for many attacks and planned to carry out a murderous attack in the territory of the State of Israel.
As the IDF continues to pummel Gaza, the government here also tightening security across parts of Jerusalem and the West Bank to ensure violence and potential terror attacks don't open a new front on Israel. George Thomas, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Still ahead, fighting the anti-Israel information war, how Hamas's narrative is affecting world opinion. Hamas may be outgunned against the Israeli military. However, some say it has one devastating weapon in its arsenal: the support of some in the Western media. Dale Hurd has the story.
Israel's version of Saturday Night Live lampoons the BBC for what some say has been one-sided coverage of the war with Hamas.
Israel has bombed a hospital, killing hundreds of innocent people. More. Much better.
Good evening, Rachel, from the illegal colony of Tel Aviv.
Funny, perhaps, and yet in the real world, widespread anti-Israel news coverage is shaping world opinion and government policies. The war between Israel and Hamas is raging not only within Gaza, but also in newsrooms. And it's a media war many would say Hamas is winning. Some major news organizations have been treating the only democracy in the Middle East as equal to or worse than Hamas, an internationally designated terrorist group that massacred innocent Israelis. And some have gotten into trouble by accepting as fact information put out by Hamas. Gil Hoffman is executive director of Honest Reporting, a pro-Israel media watchdog.
There's never been a war where the incorrect coverage has been so obvious, where the media has had to apologize over and over again, admit mistakes, and have lost their credibility so much.
After the Hamas atrocities committed on October 7th, news stories repeatedly referred to the terrorist group as gunmen or militants rather than terrorists.
Hamas is now saying on their official Telegram channel that
major news organizations were quick to report claims made by Hamas that Israel had bombed the Al-Ali Baptist Hospital, allegedly causing 500 civilian casualties. It was later found the damage came from an Islamic Jihad rocket and the casualties numbered in the dozens. The BBC has been one of the main culprits. It had to apologize for this claim about Israeli forces inside Al-Shifa Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza.
They are targeting people, including medical teams as well as Arab speakers.
The BBC later called it a misquote.
This was incorrect and misquoted a Reuters report.
This past summer, the BBC was forced to apologize when an interviewer said this to former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett.
The Israeli forces are happy to kill children.
The BBC was also forced to remove several Middle East reporters from the air after they posted on social media their support for the atrocities committed on October 7th. Dr. Tricia Miller with Camera, the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting, says the anti-Israel bias in some of the media coverage meets the definition of anti-Semitism.
Israel is consistently held to a different standard, a double standard. And the only way you can explain that is anti-Semitism.
In response to the criticism, BBC CEO Deborah Turness wrote, "We have faced criticism and complaints that we are biased both for and against Israel, and for and against the Palestinians. And while we strive to hold true to our 100-year commitment to impartiality, we of course sometimes get it wrong. We will continue to do what we have always done, to work without fear or favor and report what we see. However, news coverage doesn't occur in a vacuum, and biased coverage against Israel has had an effect." Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Coming up, lending a hand, traveling across the world to support Israeli farmers at harvest time. Cowboys on the kibbutz? A group of American cowboys traveled to Israel to help Israeli farmers struggling to harvest their crops. CBN's Chuck Holton has more on these volunteers who stepped in to show solidarity with Israel.
As fighting between Israel and Hamas militants enters its second month, it's straining much of the country's economy. Given the number of military reservists supporting the fight, local farms are short on manpower.
I mean, a lot of the dads and the men have been called up for reserves and to go to fight in Gaza. And so that leaves this area, and yeah, there's no one to harvest. So it's a need that needs done. And yeah, we just wanted to help out with that.
That's where a group of American cowboys has stepped in, traveling to Israel on their own dime to help fill the gap.
Once I got the call, I dropped everything and headed right over. Here today, we're putting in a fence to keep the pigs out of the crops, and then doing some harvest and some weeding and stuff like that, just all kinds of stuff.
The farmers here are suffering big time. So because we've worked in this area for 20 years, obviously we're not going to leave our farmers. We've got 120 farmers in this region that we've helped. So obviously these guys are the guys we're helping. So the cowboys were on their way to come help, and somebody caught them on the way in and took a picture, and it went totally viral. So now I don't think there's an Israeli in the country that doesn't know about the cowboys. But literally, we're staying to task. We've got farms. We're picking zucchini here right now. If we don't pick these things, they're going to rot, right? We have to pick them.
When you look at the news, sometimes it seems extremely scary, and yeah, there's stuff going on, but it's not. It's different when you're here than how it feels so scary when you're just reading the headlines, you know.
The men are here at the request of HaYovel, a group of American Christians who moved to Israel 20 years ago to support the Israeli people. These cowboys have come all the way from the United States at their own expense to stand out here in a field in the hot sun and harvest zucchinis right on the Jordanian border in a field that is essentially surrounded by minefields on all sides. And that might not seem like the way that you'd want to spend your vacation, but for these guys, it's not so much about the work that they're doing here. It's more about the chance to encourage Israelis and let them know that they're being supported from around the world.
I believe this is the Jewish people. It's their God-given land, and we need to support them here. I mean, it's a small country, and we need to stand with Israel. I think it's an important thing to do.
Most of these cowboys plan to stay for at least a month, hoping to provide meaningful help to the Israeli people during this difficult time.
I'm glad that people are hearing about it, but I don't want to be just, making some show of it or something. I want to be here actually helping the people of Israel and be a legitimate help.
From the Jordan Valley, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
That's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and you can access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And please remember to continue to pray as we head into this new year for the safety of IDF soldiers, all those caught in harm's way, and for the safe return of all the hostages. And as always, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. I'm Julie Stahl. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.